Welcome back to the Squared Circle Psychobabble. Michael Valenti alongside Ralph Valenti. It's time now for Swerve Me Wrong. And this one, in honor of the first all-women's pay-per-view in WWE history, we are going to discuss who started the women's evolution. Ralph says it's Paige. I say it's the Four Horsewomen, Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, and Bayley. So 10 minutes are on the clock. It starts now. Ralph, why does Paige get the credit for starting the women's evolution?
Sure. So I think it's important to kind of understand a few things. One, they talk a lot about different type of revolutions within the WWE in different eras. So with the women specifically, you had the Divas evolution, or the Divas period, which we know, as kind of Ronda Rousey alluded to, that Nikki Bella was a big portion of that. Before that, you had Lita and Trish, who were probably the best female wrestlers of their era. But it was mostly focused around just getting the women on a card, not necessarily focused around the wrestling itself. Fast forward to where we are today, obviously we have the first women's pay-per-view. That's right. That's going to be on Sunday. And where that kind of started, I believe it did start with Paige. And a big reason of why it started and why I feel Paige should be credited with starting the women's revolution, as we call it now, is because the roots of that revolution started in NXT. All right, you're going to make the argument that the Four Horsewomen started it, and I can certainly understand that, but before them, you had Paige, who ultimately started in NXT, worked with those individuals that you're going to name, came up to the main roster, and on her first night on Monday Night Raw, beat AJ Lee for the at the time, I believe it was called the Divas title. Made for a cool moment, but that really, to me, was when you had two women who could truly work a good match, and then going forward from that, you had the Four Horsewomen who would come up and they'd be involved in it. But before them was Paige. That was, again, the first time in a long time where you had a woman, female wrestler who can really go in the ring, deliver in the ring, have a good match, have a good promo. And she got a lot of attention, and certainly we know her career was cut short due to injury, and now she's the SmackDown general manager, but she's still relevant. And I think that you could make the argument, like I'm making, that Paige was the first individual to actually start that whole women's revolution and what we see today. Without her, it could have happened, but I think that was really the first moment, her winning the Divas Championship, where it shifted towards focusing more of women who could actually wrestle rather than just, having guys be able to look at women in bras and panties rolling around in mud and however else they were portrayed before that.
But at a time, you're talking about NXT really getting a surge in popularity with WWE fans. And when it came to the WWE Network, Paige was already up in WWE. People were watching the takeovers and Arrival, and it was really Charlotte, Becky, Sasha, and Bayley that were having feuds with each other and memorable matches. You talk about the Iron Man match at TakeOver Brooklyn between Sasha Banks and Bayley. Then it just brought over to the main roster. The first ever last man standing match, or last woman standing match, which we're having at Evolution, is Charlotte versus Becky Lynch. The first ever Hell in a Cell match, Charlotte Flair versus Sasha Banks. The first Elimination Chamber match, Sasha Banks and Bayley were in that match. The first ever Royal Rumble, you have Becky Lynch is number 2, Sasha Banks is number 1. And Bayley was number 28, I believe. Yeah. They were in there. So all the big moments that helped this women's evolution, those four have been involved. Right. And not just in wrestling here. Let's look at outside the United States. The first ever women's match in Abu Dhabi was Sasha Banks versus Alexa Bliss. Mm-hmm. So Sasha Banks again comes into the conversation. All these firsts are happening because of these four. And the stuff that they did at NXT, they were the ones that really brought it up. And you talk about when they say they have this women's evolution, that night they all come up. You have Paige, Charlotte, and Becky in a faction. You have Sasha Banks in a faction with Naomi and Tamina Snuka. I forgot the name of their faction was, but yeah, Team PCB. And then Bayley comes up and she becomes a Raw Women's Champion at WrestleMania with that elimination match. And you have Nia Jax, and they're all becoming huge parts of the big storylines on SmackDown and Raw. So, and then you have Mixed Match Challenge that's happening now to get women involved. And how do you not say that those four were the reason for this evolution? Like, there have been great wrestlers at the time. You could say Alundra Blaze started the evolution. You could say Trish and Lita started the evolution. You could say that Paige started the evolution. They were all great wrestlers that delivered good matches. But at the same time, they didn't provide the depth that the Four Horsewomen did.
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand the timeline of where those revolutions kind of start and understand what the women's revolution really is about. So it's really, as Stephanie kind of pointed out several times, it's really about the women playing a more prominent role and not, like I said, just not being known as being put on the card for the guys to kind of look at. And, that traditionally, just to be honest, when women would wrestle, you knew that it was going to be a short match. If you've been at a show, that's usually the time people would go take a bathroom break or something like that. Now
or they use it for that buffer between the third to last match and the last match of the night.
They didn't take much time going into the storytelling and creating characters. So trying to understand where that shift came, that's why I say Paige started that, because that's really where you got a glimpse at, okay, we're going to develop this character. She had a character. She knew what her character was. She played to her character, and she was able to deliver in matches, and they gave her the opportunity to have those matches. Whereas before, you had people like Tori Wilson and Sable, and they were good for what they were good for, but we knew why they were on the card. They were on the card because they were beautiful and great to look at. That's it. They weren't good wrestlers. And, Paige to me was really developing in NXT and coming up and feuding with AJ Lee and winning that title, and then having it where there was now going to be this push for the women to have the equal opportunity and be a prominent or play a prominent role in the storytelling and in the shows on Monday Night Raw and SmackDown. To me, that's where I define it. That's where I say, okay, this is where it really started, and Paige is the pioneer of it. The Four Horsewomen, they came soon after, but to me, that's really where it kind of started, because Paige feuded with all those individuals, whether it was in NXT or at Raw or SmackDown at some point. So to me, I still consider it being Paige.
But maybe it's just because her career was cut short. But you look at all the accolades that these four women have had. They've all been a champion at one point.
Yeah.
And you had Charlotte versus Sasha Banks. That first Hell in a Cell match was the first time ever women main evented a pay-per-view. Yep. And now they're going to main evented Royal Rumble in their first ever Royal Rumble match. And now there's talks about the women having the first ever women's main event at WrestleMania. And who's going to be involved in that? Or what's the rumored main event? Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, but Ronda didn't start the...
No, I know. I'm not saying Ronda did. But what I'm saying is that just helps with Charlotte. If Charlotte is in that picture, it always seems like everything that happens, Charlotte's in the picture. And one of those four in the picture somewhere. Mm-hmm. Whereas Paige, maybe she was just a little too early to say that she started. Maybe she planted the seeds, but they needed the water in that seed from the Four Horsewomen to let it grow.
That's my point. I think she's the one that really started it. She planted the seeds for it. She was the first one who brought something different, could actually perform in the ring, could talk, had a good character who they were willing to develop. So that's why I say it's her and not the others.
But at the same time, let's say this. Let's say those four women never come up. They just never come up to NXT. And we don't get the women's Evolution pay-per-view. We don't get the first ever women's Royal Rumble and the first ever Hell in a Cell match, the first last woman standing match, all these firsts that are happening. Would you say then that Paige started the evolution? because there wouldn't be an evolution because there's no one to follow up.
But that's not the situation that we're in. We're talking about the women's evolution because it's real. It's here.
I understand that, but that's what I'm saying. It's because of those 4, though. You take those 4 women out, we're not having this discussion. Whereas if you took Paige out of the history books, you still have those 4 horsewomen that are doing all the first for everything. So in that regard, they have started the evolution.
But you can't disregard the points of it. I understand what you're trying to say, but it doesn't make sense because, of course, if you take those women out, you're not going to have the women's revolution or evolution or whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, you do have them. And you still had Paige and you still had them, and you were at the point we're at now where we're going to have evolution and all of that stuff. So Paige is certainly a part of it. To me, I still think she was the one who started it and was the pioneer of it.
Well, unfortunately, our 10 minutes are up here for this discussion, and we all know the real answer, who started the women's evolution. It's Stephanie McMahon. She definitely started it. So what do you guys think? Make sure you comment below. Follow us all over social media. We're at SCPB Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We post videos here on YouTube every Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday. And listen to our podcast every Sunday afternoon starting at noon. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti. We'll talk to you all next week on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. If you like this segment of the Squared Circle Psychobabble, listen to the full episode by clicking the link in the description below. And make sure you subscribe and review on your favorite podcast provider. Hit subscribe and the bell for notifications for more videos. And follow us all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast.